Pawn shop owners, what was the most illegal thing a customer had brought to your shop? Worked at a gun shop and a shady-looking guy brought in a few pairs of night vision goggles, like high-end military-grade PVS-14 night vision goggles. Ask him why he was selling them. Oh, I just don't need them anymore. Cool man, do you mind if I call the company real quick and run the numbers? Sometimes this stuff is stolen property. And as soon as I said that, he jumped across the counter, grabbed the goggles and bolted for the door. Employee not owner. The guy brought in a stack of like 15 laptops that all said property of City Public School right on the top of each one. He then threatened to shoot me when I told him to get out. Added. Because it's been brought up multiple times. Yes, I am aware that schools, businesses, etc. sometimes sell off old laptops. Which is why I don't flat out call the cops whenever somebody brings in a suspected stolen item. There's always the chance that no matter how obviously stolen it is, the person owns it legit. However, I'm not going to risk my job or my conscience by taking in an item if it has a label on it claiming it's somebody else's property. Also, how am I supposed to sell a laptop that says property of City Public Schools on it? Pawn shops have a bad enough rap as it is. Not an owner but an employee. A man brought in a bag of cocaine and said if I would buy it, then resell it back to him in a couple of days. I knew someone once who was into some bad stuff. He didn't have his school-provided laptop at class one day, and never again after that. As it turns out, it was his, for these laptops were indeed our own personal property, even though the school gave them to us. But, the thing is, what they meant by giving each student a nice, free laptop, was overcharging that in fair times too, and building it into the price of tuition and, therefore, the student loan. So, I had that computer for a while. He sold his to a pawn store. How many college students do you know would refuse a new MacBook Pro back in 2010 that they won't have to pay for until they began paying back their students' loans? Okay, I'm not a pawn shop owner, but I know a few. One thing I've seen was a guy who brought in smoke grenades and M249 saw belts that he has stolen from our local military drill center. Another was a guy at a local gun store who brought in a pistol that had an illegal oil filter suppressor on it. They told the guy get the fuck out and go destroy that thing. The guy literally brought in an RPG. He was doing yard work for this old lady whose husband had passed. She gave it to him for doing some yard work, not realizing it was live and active. The guy was career military, and after the bomb squad came and disabled it, they went to her house and found a trove of similarly very illegal military-grade weapons. Had to think about that for a minute since I usually think of RPG as role-playing game, e.g., Dungeons and Dragons. Rocket-propelled grenade. I figured it out. Sorry. There's a worker here, but we had a couple come in to pawn their backhoe over the weekend, happens a lot, and brought their bill of sale. They wanted a simple $1K loan, which wasn't bad considering how much it was worth. No more than 30 minutes later, cops are there with the owner. Apparently they worked for him and went and pawned all of his industrial equipment. Literally had a customer come in and say, "Hi, I've just stolen this phone off my sister. How much will you give me for it?" Also had a customer bring in 5 MacBooks at the same time, with a certain logo on it, which gave me the impression they were stolen. Told him to leave them with me for testing and called the police. Had another customer bring in a gun and a crossbow. That was weird. I'm in the UK, this is not a normal thing. I didn't work there but was there at the time. The guy brings in a dead duck, which hunting is illegal in my area, and also why just why. I had this guitar that had a little sliding door on the side, meant to hold picks. I put weed in there as a joke. Completely forgot about it as I was selling it. They were chill. You always gotta look out for the people bringing in a shit ton of brand spanking new tools or electronics. Over time you learn to read people based on their appearance, behavior, and personal information. An experienced pawnbroker can almost always immediately sleuth out whether they're stolen or not. In these cases, they usually are. I've never had someone intentionally bring in illicit items, but it's important to check pockets and compartments on cases and similar things. It's not unheard of for some eclectic customer to forget about a little baggie of weed they'd stashed. One guy paid off his loan with cash, and there was a thin layer of white residue coating it. First time I'd seen that one. Not illegal, but toward the beginning of the coronavirus outbreak, some wisecrack nutcase did try to sell us disinfectant. Funny but also annoying. So I'm not an owner and I wouldn't call this illegal per se, but I feel like I have to share this. A friend of mine owns a pawn shop, and one day a dude walks in with a cardboard box filled to the top with his own shit. He claims that it's magic and my friend cuts him off right there and kicks him out. As he is walking out he drops the box on accident, gets all of his shit on the floor, sees the mess he's made, stares at the horrid pile of shit for a couple of seconds, and runs out of the shop. My friend never got his name, and never saw him again. The smell would proceed to linger in the shop for a good month after it was cleaned up. Edit. Typo. Not a pawn shop owner but was in the pawn shop when this happened. Someone brought in a wheelchair with a tag for the local hospital on the back. Example. Property of somewhere hospital. The pawn shop owner told them to leave it and get out. They did, and he called the non-emergency line. The police came and picked it up and took it back to the hospital, or that's what they said they were doing. A friend of mine owns a rather unique store, not a pawn shop, but he sells a lot of authentic medieval weaponry, armor, clothing and similar. While I was there, a young couple decided his shop was the place to sell a fueled SS daggers, belts, flags and other Nazi memorabilia. Solid logic, except for one thing. We're in Germany. Here the state kind of frowns upon owning or selling this kind of stuff. They could have donated it to any museum, and would have had no issue with the law whatsoever. I mean, it was not their fault they found it, right? But they figured that if Grandpa was a Nazi, he could at least help with the funds for the renovations, and decided cash was better than being named in a museum leaflet. My friend was mostly insulted by the idea that just because he owns a medieval store and sells historic weapons, he must know a Nazi collector that would pay cash, but that was the end of it. He told them to get out and donate it, or if they insist on selling it, to ship it to the US. More money from history buffs, or at least not one happy little German Nazi with a new happy stabby toy. At a local auction a block from my house here in the US, they had a dagger presented by Hermann Göring to a general. The presentation from to was etched on the blade. It was in the presentation box that was a little tattered from the age of it. The knife itself was not a rare one, they made a lot of them, and it even has a production error where the parts do not line up correctly, but the inscription was the value. The major players were a guy who flew in from Spain, a phone bidder, and a guy who flew in from Brazil. The item comes up for bid, and the guy from Spain is ready to put up his card to bid. The first bid is $10,000, and the guy from Spain just drops his hand and never bid on it. The bidding was between the guy from Brazil and the phone bidder, and it sold for $52,000. It was said that the guy from Brazil had $500,000 United States dollars with him to buy the dagger. I have a picture I took of a huge WW2 captured Nazi flag that was hung on the wall. The funny thing is that with the guy from Spain sitting in front of it and a bunch of folding chairs, it kind of looks like I was at a Nazi meeting. Not a pawn shop owner, but I was on the receiving end of someone selling my stolen stuff at one. We had our house burgled in UK. Me and my dad went to some pawn shops to give them a list of everything taken. Whilst we were in there, someone comes up to counter and starts unloading a bunch of stuff they want to pawn. It was our stuff. We got in a major incident inside the shop. The asshole manager of cash converters was saying it's nothing to do with me, take it all outside the shop. Sorry buddy, but when you're happy to buy a camera full of someone else's family photos, a laptop, and a bunch of other electronics from two junkies who look like they're homeless, no teeth, obvious signs of drug abuse etc., then it's absolutely, 100% your problem to deal with. Police called, junkies charged with handling stolen goods. I got charged with assault. That was later dropped. Nobody charged with the actual burglary, so no real punishments for anyone involved. I used to work at a paw store. A shady guy brought in a tiger skull. I don't remember if it was illegal or not, but the owner was yelling at him. He kept coming back brining animal skin and skulls. I think the police drug busted his house. From what the owner told me. An MP40. Not actually me, but my significant other. He manages a store owned by a national chain. Brought in on pawn, and as with all neat things he was just waiting for the loan to drop. After 30 days of non-payment, item goes out for sale. At this point he could purchase it. Now I'm not a huge gun historian, but I know the era and style and had to ask, that gun is super rare if it's not full auto. When a gun is taken in on loan the gun is run, not the person, so our state's Bureau of Investigation was notified of its existence. Not only is a federal stamp for automatic weapon expensive AF, it's also difficult to obtain, so he was no longer going to purchase it. And it's a good thing because shortly after the gun was seized by ATF, which is when we found out the actual worth. $10,000 $20,000 original owner brought it back as a war trophy. Son is the one he get a loan for like $200, but it was never registered, so it was contraband. Added. Good news is that it wasn't destroyed but ended up in a museum. Story from the 90s. My Fender Stratocaster was stolen and I reported it. Couple years passed and an officer called me. Off. Your guitar serial number showed up at a pawn shop. Me. Great. So you know he stole it. Off. The guy who sold it to pawn shop said it was a present from his girlfriend but she died. Me. Okay. So I get my guitar back. Off. No. The pawn shop already sold it. Me. Don't they have to check serial numbers? Off. Yeah, but that can take 30 days, and we can't expect them to hold on to this stuff forever. Me. What? So what do I do now? Off. Nothing really. Me. So why are you calling me? Off. Just thought you would want to know. Bye. Source. My true story. Most stuff isn't even worth the time to report it stolen. A TV was stolen from my dad's office and sold to a pawn shop Pawn America, La Crosse, Wisconsin. This had been happening with yard decorations, and our neighbors told us what pawn shop to look at. Sure enough, it showed up, and at first the manager would not provide any info or even cared that we thought it was stolen. My dad then offered to buy, and requested that the TV be plugged in to check for defects. It worked just fine and my dad said he will take it, but then pulled the remote out his pocket that the thief didn't take and turned the TV off, proving it was his. The manager then had to call and report this. Turns out accepting a TV without a remote is a red flag that he missed in this case. The manager quit, but the general belief was he knew most of the stuff he was selling was stolen, but he fudged paperwork to keep the thief's identity a secret. My dad put him in his place and humiliated him in the most simple way for being a lying beep. Not a pawn shop owner or employee, but a block away from my high school was a pawn shop. It was announced that everyone in the entire school was going to get a Chromebook to do schoolwork. On the first day that we got the Chromebooks, it was rumored that multiple people had brought them to the pawn shop to make a quick buck. I asked one of my teachers who was in charge of all the Chromebook repairs about this later, and he said that only one student had actually done it that he knew of, and he had used the money to buy weed. A really nice old-looking farmer man walks in with a shotgun with a barrel way too short. Long story short, boss bought it off of him, and immediately called the local paid to tell them. Cop asked if you could just remove the barrel and dispose of it, as it was too much paperwork and hassle to come down and get it. Local paid our beeping joke. I don't like pawn shops. My buddy had his surfboard stolen. A few weeks later he found his board in a pawn shop. My buddy approached the staff and said it was his and it had been stolen. The staff then told him he had to buy the board if he wanted it back. The police were called because the board was reported stolen. Upon the arrival of the police, my buddy learned that he still had to buy the board if he wanted it back and then file a claim with the state to get his money back. Why does the state cover pawn shops selling stolen goods? My dad's friend works at a pawn shop in a shitty area and has had some crazy shit come in. Mostly stolen guns and tools, but the story he likes to tell is when a homeless guy tried to sell a sawed-off shotgun covered in tape. They called the cops, and the guy tells them he found it in the park. Please subscribe.